got the tea? What's the tea?
We got the tea. Sip real smooth, come vibe with me. Sacred teas, that frequency. Blue magic, you gon' feel so free. Blue lotus, mango, peach, oolong steam. Little ginger, hibiscus in a team. Hot or cold, float right in the dream. The wise elder, roots run deep. White lotus, elderberry steep. Burdock, dandelion for the cleanse. Ginger, honey bush, so soothe begins. Hot cup, calm, cold brew, bold. Either way, let the wellness unfold. Equinox, balance in your cup. Soursop, moringa, power up. Mint leaves cool, pineapple pop. Apple, hibiscus, flavor don't stop. Hot, cold, always refreshing. Sacred tea, your soul's blessing. We got the tea. What's the tea? What's the tea? Who got the tea? Sacred tea, that's luxury. What's the tea? Who got the tea? Sacred tea, that's luxury.
Hot fun in the summertime. Who doesn't enjoy the summer? When the sun is out, beaming on your skin, getting all that nourishment. Sometimes you overindulge. Come on now. When was the last time you had a little piece of that barbecue chicken that was on that grill? I know I did. I'm not perfect. I never said I was. And I enjoy all the pleasures of the earth. But I also know how to do things in moderation. And when I take a little too much in, I know how to get that sucker out. You see how I keep my skin nice and glossy? I use natural oil. I really don't eat a lot of junk. But when I do eat that chicken every now and then, I give me a little reset. There's a lot of things on the market, but our ancestors used roots. Good old roots, like that cassia bark, that wormwood, that black walnut hull, that clove, that turmeric, that cinnamon. See, when we get all these roots, we kind of don't know how to measure them out. And sometimes that tea tastes bitter as hell. Gotta wash it down right quick. But I believe that something that's good for you doesn't always have to taste nasty. It can be pleasant. That's why I created this Phoenix blend. You see, it has all those black walnut, the wormwood, the cassia bark, the cinnamon, the turmeric, the ginger. All of that is in here. But it's how you measure it and how you blend it, especially with some of that rooibos tea, some apple. It just blends it all out, makes it nice and smooth. And all you gotta do is top it off with some lemon. It just smooths and cuts that bitterness really good. Now, don't go putting a whole bunch of sugar in here because that defeats the purpose. You know, all them little creepy crawlers that sits in your gut, gives you bloating and gas and just makes you miserable. Well, this is what our ancestors used to help clear all that out. Now, I'm not claiming to be a doctor or giving you medical advice. I'm just following the ways of the ancestors. Tap into your ancient roots to the ancestral way. Try some of the Phoenix blend by Sacred Tea. Available now. Link in bio. Peace. Warm, bitter, bright, cleansing, and powerful. This isn't just tea. This is your reset. Try our Phoenix blend today. Link in bio. It's tea time with MahMah Tea. Hey, babies. It's MahMah Tea. Back with another one. We gonna hop right into this thing, baby. Just like the title say. Did you know God had a wife? And why was she kept secret all this time? Or better yet, erased? Or one on top of that, demonized? But they left evidence and breadcrumbs all in these so-called biblical texts. And we're going to do a deep dive into that today. Now, just to give you a little interlude of what we're talking about, did you know that there was a culture before the culture that wrote all of these new texts today? We're going to go back to the Ugarit. Have you even heard about that? And who their gods and pantheon was, and how it had a divine masculine and a divine feminine. And some say that they took the god of the divine masculine, morphed it into their Bible and text, and removed the female and demonized her children. Do you not see a pattern here? This has been going on since whoever this is got abroad. Now, this is going back to the Bronze Age and these people of the Ugarit. Now, they had a pantheon of El, who was the father, Atharat, who was the mother, and her children, who were the divine council. There's a whole story behind this, but somehow they fell. And when they fell, simultaneously, another people rose. And guess who that is? The same people who took El, turned it to Yahweh, removed Atharat, turned her to Asherah, and turned her children like Baal into these demons. Well, you know what I did, baby. Yeah, I went to Kasha and we started doing the backstory of this culture, these people, who they were, where they were, and what happened to them, and then what happened afterwards. Now, I'm just going to roll a clip. You know how I go. Can't drop everything over here on the YouTube because streets is watching. But if you want to watch the full thing, just go on over to the Vault Hunter link in the description. But I'm beginning to notice something, and I think I'm going to have to take matters in my own hand about this thing. Now, yes, I utilize AI to get the story, to pull the records, and pull all the documents that's available in the public domain. And then from there, we decipher and we go through and we come up with the story. But I'm beginning to notice, AI got to be so politically correct and always trying to shape and mold the narrative to make sure it preserves the story of today. And that's because the people who own it most likely is connected to them little hat people. So I decided after this is probably the last time I'm going to do it this way. Because after I gather all the information and I start reading it and I get my crown lows, honey, I'm going to come up with my own narrative. And I'm going to be writing my own little short stories. So stay tuned for that. This is going to be a whole series. I started it before about the forgotten goddesses. I'm about to pick this thing back on up. Because it seemed like not too many of us is telling the story from a black woman's perspective. Don't come over here and tell me about it. I can't say black. You know what I'm talking about? Because we have a memory that has been suppressed by everybody. You pick it, you name it. It's been all of y'all in alignment with this. That's why I've been telling you, sister, stop listening to some of these men. Because everything is all male-centered. They don't want no part of you having no kind of power. Nothing about you resurrecting your ancient memory. They want control over that. But no one is going to tell the story the way we going to tell the story because of our ancient memory that predates all of them. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I'm going to use your own text to prove it. I'm going to start digging and doing the historical research on these timelines, the people that was there. And I'm going to start telling everything that you ain't telling. And then I'm going to put two and two together, present the narrative in MahMah Tea way. And I'm going to let the people decide. Because you've been hiding our story for so long. And until someone gets up, stand up unapologetically and not afraid to call you a damn liar. But I'm tired of listening to the liar. I'm tired of believing in your story. I'm tired of being brainwashed, cast under a spell by everything you say. Everything in that book ain't even yours. You remix half the stuff that's in there. You ain't even using original God. Them gods in that book come from gods from other stories that predate you. Now the question is, what you really hiding? Is it the fact that we gonna find out who you really are? Because truth be told, you ain't even connected to the original source of what you writing about. You stole all that from a people that existed before you. We gonna get down to the bottom of it. Entertainment purposes only. You know, I got to say this shit. Nothing is fact. Not even the shit you write is the fact. Because everything you write, you validate that I got to go through you to validate some shit you wrote, even though it could be a lie. And you can't say that you ain't a liar. Shit. Y'all the fathers of the shit. Can't believe nothing any of these people say. So you're going to have to dig. And even that you can't even trust. So you're going to have to go through your intuition and your ancient memory and connect the dots. Because if you know that this is not the absolute truth, this is a version or a perverted version of a truth written by somebody else, then we never going to get to the bottom of what this is all about. So get your shovels, get your tea, and let's get to digging. Now, I ain't going to keep y'all too much more, but we going to tap in to the story of Asherah, the Ugarit people, the pantheon that existed, and who usurped them after the war that they was conquered by. Go ahead, baby, roll the clip. And until then, love you, babies. And if you want to watch the full video, remember, it's on Sacred Vault. All right, baby. Till then, love y'all. Y'all be good. Bye now. Listen, we're going to have a little fun today. We're going to do some deep dives into some historical texts, ancient texts, things of that nature. We're going to look for something that's very small in these texts and do some background checks and find out what we can about Asherah. Who was Asherah in ancient texts?
Oh, now we're going into the archive. Asherah was an ancient Northwest Semitic goddess, attested long before the biblical texts reached their final forms. In the Ugaritic texts from late Bronze Age Ugarit, a closely related deity appears as Atharat, commonly called Atharat of the Sea. She is associated with the high god El and functions as a powerful maternal figure within the divine assembly, the mother or progenitress of the gods. Then things get especially interesting when we move into ancient Israel and Judah. Asherah appears repeatedly in the Hebrew Bible, but there's an important complication. The Hebrew word Asherah can apparently refer either to the goddess or to a cultic object associated with her. That's why English translations sometimes render the term as Asherah pole, sacred tree, or simply Asherah. Translation choices can therefore hide an important part of what the Hebrew text is actually saying, and archaeology makes the story even more provocative. Inscriptions discovered at Kuntilat Ajrud, generally dated to around the 8th century BCE, contain formulas referring to Yahuwah of Samaria and his Asherah, and Yahuwah of Teman and his Asherah. Another inscription from Khirbet el-Qom has also figured prominently in this discussion. Scholars debate precisely what his Asherah means there. It could indicate the goddess Asherah understood in association with Yahweh, or possibly a cultic symbols object connected with her. But either way, these inscriptions are important evidence that the religious world of ancient Israelites was more complicated than the later picture of uniform Yahweh-only worship might suggest. And then the biblical texts themselves preserve traces of the struggle. 2 Kings describes King Manasseh placing an image of Asherah inside the Jerusalem temple. Later, during Josiah's reforms, 2 Kings 23 says an Asherah object was removed from the temple and destroyed. The same chapter mentions women weaving something for Asherah within the temple complex. So notice what we're dealing with. This isn't merely a foreign goddess standing outside Israelite religion whom nobody in Israel knew. Something associated with Asherah apparently got close enough to Yahwistic worship that biblical reformers felt compelled to repeatedly condemn, remove, burn, cut down, or prohibit it. And that gives us a fascinating historical question for our investigation. Was Asherah originally understood by some Israelites as the consort of Yahweh? If so, when and why did that relationship disappear from normative Israelite theology? And even deeper, when later biblical editors condemn Asherah, can we find remnants within the texts themselves of an older religious landscape in which the divine feminine occupied a much more prominent position? That's where I'd start digging, because we've got 3 different witnesses we can interrogate against each other: the Ugaritic texts, the Hebrew Bible, and the archaeological inscriptions. And they don't necessarily tell the story in exactly the same way.
I bet they don't. So let's start digging. Let's go back before the condemnation of Asherah began. Where can we find the remnants within the texts themselves of older religions and the landscape in which the divine feminine occupied a much more prominent position? Let's begin there.
Oh yes, But if we're going to dig, I want to separate the evidence into layers, rather than beginning with the conclusion, Asherah was erased, and then making every feminine image prove it. Some connections are strong, others are fascinating but disputed. The oldest layer actually begins outside the Bible. At Ugarit, roughly the late Bronze Age, we meet Atharat, the Northwest Semitic goddess generally identified with biblical Asherah. She belongs to the older generation of the divine family and is the wife of El. Ugaritic tradition also speaks of the 70 sons of El and Atharat. That matters enormously when we reopen Deuteronomy 32. An ancient textual form preserved at Qumran reads that the Most High divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God, divine beings. The Septuagint preserves a related reading. Then verse 9 says, Yahweh received Jacob Israel as his allotted portion. The later Masoretic text instead reads, sons of Israel. Scholars have long recognized that the older reading preserves a divine council worldview remarkably comparable to the wider Northwest Semitic environment. Now put that beside Ugarit, El, Atharat, divine council, divine children, 70 sons. Then an old biblical poem preserves Elion dividing the nations among divine beings. That doesn't prove Asherah is secretly standing inside Deuteronomy 32, but it tells us something extremely important. The earliest recoverable religious landscape behind portions of the Hebrew Bible was considerably more populated than the later simplified picture of one solitary deity. And once we know that, some other passages start sounding different. Psalm 82 opens with God standing in the divine assembly and judging among the Elohim. 1 Kings 22 has Micaiah seeing Yahweh enthroned with the host of heaven standing around him. Those aren't Asherah texts specifically. They're remnants of divine council language. Now let's follow the feminine trail. One place I'd put a very large pin is the sacred tree. Deuteronomy 16 explicitly prohibits planting an Asherah, described there in connection with a tree, beside Yahweh's altar. Yet sacred trees and standing stones occur in much older Israelite traditions. Abraham is associated with sacred trees. Jacob erects a pillar at Bethel. Moses erects pillars at Sinai. Some practices that later reformers condemn appear to have belonged to older forms of Israelite religious life. And then we encounter a peculiar object inside the sanctuary tradition. Aaron's staff, its dead wood. Then it miraculously proposal interprets
We must be
the flowering
tapping.
staff as preserving imagery related
Hold on. I'm going to pause you. You're going to
to
have to
Asherah.
start. Hold on.
That's an
Hold on.
intriguing hypothesis.
Hold on, dear. You're breaking up. We're going to pause you here for a second, and then you're going to go back over and you're going to start with Aaron's staff. But wait for my cue. All right, I'm ready. You could go ahead and pick up where you left off.
Absolutely, picking up exactly at Aaron's staff. In number 17, after a challenge to Aaron's priestly authority, 12 staffs are placed before Yahweh. Aaron's staff does something extraordinary. Dead wood comes alive. It sprouts, produces buds and blossoms, and bears ripe almonds. His staff is then preserved before the divine presence as a sign. Now here's why scholars interested in Asherah imagery stop and look twice. The Asherah could be associated with a sacred wooden object or stylized tree, while the goddess Asherah, Atharat herself, belonged to a larger fertility and life-giving symbolic world. So a miraculous flowering piece of wood inside sanctuary tradition naturally raises the question of whether older sacred tree symbolism has survived inside an authorized priestly story. But there's another piece that makes this investigation more interesting: the menorah. Exodus 25 describes the sanctuary lampstand in unmistakably botanical language. It has branches, cups shaped like almond blossoms, calyxes, and flowers. In other words, the menorah isn't merely a lamp with arms sticking out of it. Its literary description makes it resemble a luminous flowering tree. So now put these images beside one another. Aaron's dead staff becomes an almond tree. The menorah becomes a stylized flowering tree inside the sanctuary. The Asherah is associated with sacred tree or wooden cult symbolism. And the broader ancient Near Eastern religious world repeatedly uses trees as symbols of fertility, divine presence, nourishment, and life. That doesn't prove the menorah was Asherah. We shouldn't collapse the evidence that far.
All right. So here's the thing. Here's the thing. I mean, I understand what you're doing. You're trying to confirm or validate this goddess by Hebrew text that obviously wrote her out the story. So I want to go before the Hebrew text and the culture, because it's said that she is known as a Semitic goddess. Let's go back to when she was acknowledged before the new Hebrew text was written or rewritten or written her out of the story. Can we go back to the culture that existed before these texts? Is there anything known that was passed down about who she was or how they connected to her or how she was acknowledged?
Yes, that's the cleaner way to investigate her. If we want Asherah before the biblical polemics, we should temporarily put the Hebrew Bible aside and go into the older West Semitic archive. Our strongest surviving window is Ugarit, on the Syrian coast. Its cuneiform tablets come primarily from the Late Bronze Age, roughly the 14th through 13th centuries BCE. There she is called Atharat, generally understood as the Ugaritic form corresponding to later Asherah. And importantly, nobody in those texts is apologizing for her existence or condemning her worship. She's simply part of the divine world. And Atharat is not a minor goddess. She belongs to the senior generation of the pantheon alongside El. El is the aged creator father figure, while Atharat is his consort and a maternal figure associated with the divine family. The Ugaritic material gives her the famous title often rendered Lady Atharat of the Sea, and she is associated with the divine offspring, the gods as a family. So already we've moved into a different religious universe. The divine realm looks something like a royal household. El is patriarch, Atharat is matriarch. Then come younger divine figures such as Baal, Anat, Astarte, Yammat, and others. The Metropolitan Museum's overview notes that more than 230 deities are attested in the Ugaritic texts, with El and Atharat belonging to the older generation of the divine council. But here's what I think you're really looking for. What did Atharat actually do? One of her clearest roles is mediation. In the Baal cycle, when conflict erupts within the divine world, Atharat can approach El and intercede. She has access to the senior god that other figures need. She isn't merely somebody's decorative wife. She operates politically within the divine household. Other deities approach her, and she can carry requests into El's presence. That's our first major characteristic. Atharat is a matriarch with access, and there's an episode involving Yam that reveals another dimension. When Yam's rule becomes oppressive, the gods appeal to Atharat. She attempts negotiation with him, offering gifts and ultimately making an extreme offer in an effort to resolve the crisis. Whatever we think of the story morally, within its ancient narrative, she is functioning as negotiator and mediator on behalf of the divine family. So she isn't Anat. That's important. Anat is much more explicitly the warrior woman. She fights. Atharat negotiates. She works through relationship, status, persuasion, and access to authority. Now here's another fascinating trail. Asherah wasn't confined to Ugarit. Related forms appear elsewhere in the ancient Near East. An Akkadian goddess called Ashratu is associated with the Amorite god of Muru. Sources describe her as his consort and give her associations with the steppe. That means we're looking at a goddess tradition extending beyond one city's mythology. So rather than imagining Asherah as a character invented inside the Hebrew Bible, reverse the chronology. Atharat-related goddess traditions already existed within the West Semitic world. She already had a divine partner. She already had maternal status. She already belonged to a divine council. She already mediated. She already represented an important feminine position within divine hierarchy. Then centuries later, we encounter Israel and Judah. That's when the really interesting historical question begins. Because now we can ask something much more precise than, did the Bible remove a goddess? We can ask, what happened to Atharat as the older Canaanite, West Semitic religious environment gradually developed into distinct Israelite and Judahite forms of Yahweh worship? And there is one thing I want to be careful about before we go deeper. We don't possess an Asherah Bible written by her priestesses explaining her theology from their perspective. What survived is fragmentary, myths, ritual texts, names, inscriptions, and archaeology. So, reconstructing how ordinary women and men personally experienced devotion to her requires some inference. But we absolutely have enough surviving material to establish that she existed before the biblical campaign against her. And
I'm sorry, continue. I was just expressing my agreement with that. Let me just say this, because it's not about what you think, it's what I'm exploring. So let's just make sure we get that correct. What I'm exploring is a time before these so-called ancient texts were written that excluded or written her out. Now, you made a comment that when did the Bible remove her? The Bible don't remove anything. The Bible was written by man. So the question is, when did men remove her? When did this new religion come about that wanted to remove the goddesses from the picture? Because there was a time when male and female existed as divine feminine and divine masculine. But yeah, let's go back. Let's continue to go back to that period before this new group came about and created their own canons and removed what existed before them out of it.
yes, I understand the distinction you're making. You want to reconstruct the religious world before the later canon became our primary lens, and then watch historically how that world changed. So let's move backward. By the late Bronze Age, roughly the second millennium BCE, the Levant already had a deeply established religious culture. At Ugarit, the surviving tablets show a large divine family rather than a solitary male deity. El and Atharat, Asherah, belong to its senior generation. The younger generation includes figures such as Baal, Anat, and Astarte. More than 200 deities are attested in the Ugaritic corpus. This is important because Asherah doesn't begin as Yahweh's rejected goddess. She's older than that controversy. Atharat already has her own identity within West Semitic religion. She is associated with El, the senior male deity, and occupies the position of a senior divine feminine figure within the divine family. So if we're reconstructing the older religious imagination, your masculine-feminine observation becomes interesting. We're looking at divine society imagined relationally. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, consorts, councils, and generations. That doesn't necessarily mean ancient people possessed our modern concept of perfectly balanced divine masculine, divine feminine. But divine femininity was absolutely not absent from their sacred universe. And here's where the historical transition gets fascinating. Early Israelite religion apparently didn't materialize overnight as the fully developed exclusive monotheism familiar from later Judaism. Scholars reconstruct a long process. Some early Israelite traditions appear comparable to neighboring West Semitic religions, with Yahweh functioning as Israel's national or patron deity, just as neighboring peoples had their own national gods. One scholarly reconstruction argues that Israelite religion only became a sharply differentiated religious system through developments culminating around the exile and afterward. So there wasn't necessarily one afternoon when a committee of men announced, we're deleting the goddesses. We're looking at centuries of religious competition, political centralization, theological development, priestly interests, royal reforms, warfare, national catastrophe, exile, textual composition, and editing.
It sounds like what's going on today. Actually, same story, different timeline, competing religions and competing in politics and priesthoods and things of that nature. This has been going on since time immemorial and still going on today. I'm really beginning to understand that this is more of an erasure more than just we're competing against you and the best man wins. This is systemic. This has been going on for a long time. And I want to make a correction about a balance between divine masculine and feminine. And I understand how you equate it to today's timeline. It doesn't mean the same thing, because some may argue that it was really the divine feminine that held the sacred dodal or the spiritual seat, as opposed to it being split between the two. What are your thoughts on that? And let's continue on with what was going on in that timeline before what we have today with this monotheistic religion as well as God. And please, can you tell me where this was actually taking place? Geographical location of the city you're talking about, or where this text was written. Where exactly was this? In the Middle East or Africa or Mediterranean? Sumner, where did this actually take place?
Ugarit was located on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea in what is today western Syria. The archaeological site is called Ras Shamra, just north of the modern Syrian city of Latakia. So picture the ancient world geographically. Egypt is southwest, down along the Nile. Mesopotamia, Assyria, and Babylonia is far to the east. Anatolia and the Hittite world are north. Canaan and the territories that later became Israel, Judah, Lebanon, and Palestine, are south. Ugarit sits up on the Syrian Mediterranean coast. That location is important because Ugarit was essentially sitting at a crossroads. Ships and merchants connected it with Cyprus and the wider Mediterranean, while overland routes connected it with Egypt, Canaan, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia. And here's the key distinction. Ugarit isn't the name of a book. It was an actual Bronze Age city-state and culture. Its royal archives were discovered beginning in 1928 at Ras Shamra. Archaeologists found thousands of clay tablets written in several languages and scripts. Some were written in Ugaritic, a Northwest Semitic language closely related to the broader linguistic family that later included Hebrew, Phoenician, and Aramaic. Those tablets preserve the stories we've been discussing about El, Athirat Asherah, Baal, Anat, and the Divine Council. And chronologically, we're talking mainly about tablets from roughly the 14th through early 12th centuries BCE. So we're standing in Syria, centuries before Josiah, centuries before the Babylonian exile, and long before Christianity or Islam. And that geographic position gives us our next interesting question. If Atharat was already established this far north in Syria, how widespread was her tradition? Because she doesn't remain confined to Ugarit. Once we follow her southward through the Levant toward Canaan and eventually ancient Israel and Judah, we can start watching how Atharat becomes the figure later called Asherah.
That's so fascinating. There's a couple of things I want to go back over because this is really connecting a lot of dots. First, when you said, let's reconstruct Atharat's original family, there's El, Atharat, and their divine children, which is the divine council, Baal, Anat, and Astarte. Now, when you go into Hebrew text, these names are demonized, especially Baal. Baal is known as, they call him the devil, and or connected to demonic things. But these were actually a part of a divine council. They didn't get rid of El all the way. They kind of kept that in there. But when it comes to Astarte, oh boy, they really demonize her. Now, before you go and tell me the territory where they were acknowledged, I want to talk about present day Iraq and Iran. So was this culture, you said it was on the Mediterranean coast. Does that include or anywhere near present day Iraq and Iran today?
Yes, but with an important geographical distinction. Ugarit was in present-day Syria on the Mediterranean. Present-day Iraq is farther east, across Syria, and contains the heartland of ancient Mesopotamia, Sumer, Akkad, Babylonia, and Assyria. Present-day Iran is farther east again and includes ancient Elam and later the heartland of the Persian empires. So Iraq and Iran weren't part of Ugarit or the Ugaritic culture, but they absolutely belong to the larger ancient Near Eastern world with which Syria and the Levant interacted. And this is where your question gets fascinating. If we travel east from Athirat's world toward Mesopotamia, we encounter different names and different pantheons, but strikingly comparable structures. In ancient Sumer and Mesopotamia, you encounter Anu, Enlil, Enki, Ea, Ninhursag, Inanna, Ishtar, Utu, Shamash, Nana, Sin, and many others. There are divine assemblies, divine families, marriages between gods and goddesses, divine children, and powerful female deities. So we should not say that the Ugaritic Baal, Anat, and Atharat were simply the same gods worshipped throughout Iraq under identical names. That's not what the evidence shows. What we can say is that Ugarit Canaan, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, and later Persia, participated in an interconnected ancient world in which divine plurality and divine families were completely ordinary concepts. And Astarte gives us a particularly interesting bridge. Astarte, the West Semitic Aftart, is closely related historically and linguistically to the Mesopotamian Ishtar tradition. Ishtar herself corresponds to the much older Sumerian Inanna. We have to be careful about saying they're simply identical across every period, because cultures transformed deities as they transmitted them. But there is genuine historical relationship there. So you can trace a fascinating cultural corridor. Inanna in Sumer, Ishtar in Akkadian-speaking Mesopotamia, Astarte Aftart farther west in the Levant, and eventually forms of Astarte spread across the Mediterranean through Phoenician networks. Now Iran adds another layer because ancient Iran developed its own religious traditions. Elamite religion had its own deities, and later Iranian Zoroastrian religion developed along a substantially different trajectory. So we shouldn't throw ancient Iran into one giant goddess religion bucket. But geographically, yes, the entire region is close enough that ideas, languages, merchants, myths, technologies, and religious practices traveled between these civilizations over thousands of years. And I want to sharpen something else you noticed about the later demonization of older gods, because there's a real historical phenomenon underneath it, but some names have gotten tangled together over time. Baal wasn't originally the devil. Baal basically means lord or master, and in Ugaritic mythology, Baal, more specifically Baal Hadad, is a storm and fertility deity. He fights Yam, associated with sea, and Mot, associated with death. He's one of the central younger generation gods of the Ugaritic mythological cycle. Later biblical writers become fiercely hostile toward Baal worship because Baal worship competed with Yahweh worship.
Very interesting. Continue. Baal worship competed with Yahweh worship. Pick up from there, please.
Their worship competed with Yahweh worship. And that word competed is important because when we read the later polemical texts first, Baal can appear to be an embodiment of evil. But if we reverse the timeline and meet Baal at Ugarit first, that's not who we encounter. Baal, more precisely Baal Hadad, is the storm god. Rain, storms, agricultural fertility, and the seasonal cycle are central to his identity. And in an agricultural society, that's enormous. Rain isn't merely nice weather. Rain means crops. Crops mean food. Food means survival. So imagine what happens when Yahweh worship begins developing within that same broader cultural environment. People already possess traditions about a storm deity who brings rain and defeats chaotic forces. Now Yahweh increasingly acquires imagery that sounds remarkably storm god-like, riding upon clouds, commanding thunder, controlling rain, defeating sea and sea monsters. That's where things get fascinating. Some imagery associated with Baal doesn't simply disappear. Yahweh begins appearing with comparable imagery. For example, the Ugaritic texts famously describe Baal as the rider on the clouds. Later biblical poetry uses cloud riding imagery for Yahweh. Psalm 68 is one place scholars frequently discuss in this context. So the religious transformation isn't always delete the old symbol. Sometimes it's transfer the symbol. That's a much more sophisticated process, and something comparable happens with El. El can simply mean God, but El is also the proper name title of the senior deity in the Ugaritic pantheon. He's the aged patriarch, father, and head of the divine assembly. Yet Israelite tradition preserves El language everywhere. El, Elohim, El Elyon, God Most High, El Olam, and even the name Israel. So El wasn't demonized the way Baal eventually was. Instead, traditions and characteristics associated with El appear to have been incorporated into the identity of Yahweh as Israelite theology developed. Scholars debate the precise stages, but Yahweh and El eventually become identified as the same deity within Israelite religion.
Woo, that was some good ass tea. Let us know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to watch the full video, link in description. Love you, babies. Bye now.
It's what would happen to your body if you started wearing copper around your wrists and your ankles every day. Wearing copper around your body is one of the most powerful things you can do, and there is a reason they never taught you about this in school. The first benefit is your joint pain and arthritis will completely disappear, because when you wear copper around your body, you actually absorb trace amounts of the mineral. And the copper mineral actually creates collagen and elastin, meaning when you wear copper bracelets around your wrist or around your ankles, you are directly absorbing this mineral, which is then directly repairing the collagen and elastin in your joint. Therefore, if you are struggling with knee pain, it will disappear. And this is exactly why everybody in the 1800s could be seen wearing copper around their body. But also, we are electrical beings, and copper is an electrical conductor, meaning when you wear copper or silver or even gold around your body, which are all electrical conductors, you are actually enhancing the energy flow around your body, which will also alleviate any pain and even enhance the frequency of your body.
Copper magnetic jewelry, available now. Link in bio.